Welcome everyone. I'm Soozey Johnstone, and on behalf of the TechDiversity Foundation, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar from the area now known as the City of Yarra in Melbourne, Victoria, which stands on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Their connection to the land and its waterways extends back thousands of years to the beginning of time, when their creator spirit Bunjil formed the land and all living things. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are living, learning and working from today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders participating in this webinar. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay respect to elders, past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and the hopes of Aboriginal Australia. We must always remember that underneath the concrete, the asphalt, this land is, was and always will be traditional Aboriginal land. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to be here today. You know, it's such a bizarre time. We're caught up in the day-to-day of keeping our lives and our businesses going. And I believe there's never been a more important time to be making decisions through the lens of diversity. We have 80 people with us today. Many of you have been big and long-term supporters of TechDiversity, and thank you for your continued support. And some of you are joining us for the very first time, so we thought it was important to give you a little bit of background on TechDiversity. TechDiversity is a community committed to amplifying diversity awareness, achieving a culture of inclusion through conversation, collaboration, and action. Since 2015, the TechDiversity Awards has recognised individuals and groups that are raising awareness and creating change through diversity initiatives and programs. And due to the recent impact of COVID-19, the awards have been postponed now to 2021. However, the impact of TechDiversity is going to continue through this webinar series, and we're about to announce today a virtual Hall of Fame, which will celebrate diversity in Australian organisations. You're going to hear more about the Hall of Fame over the coming weeks, and our nominees will be announced during our September webinar. So watch out for that. You can read more about TechDiversity, our awards program, and the award-winning initiatives of our past nominees at techdiversityawards.com. And we have some very special, very big news to announce. Luli Adiemo and the team at Best Case Scenario have taken over the TechDiversity Foundation. Our committee and volunteers will remain the same, with the big difference of having a marketing and events team supporting all of the detail that goes on behind the scenes in a very busy awards program, not to mention all of our events. And through Best Case Scenarios, we will be able to take those events truly national. So for those of you at our last awards ceremony in September last year, we had 520 people in the Sofitel boardroom, and we also had a wait list. That event alone is a massive workload for a team of volunteers. And we do know that with Luli and her team at the helm, the TechDiversity Awards program and events will be truly national, and the future looks very bright. And that brings us to today. The format for today's webinar is panel and Q&A. We've had many questions sent in advance. In fact, we've got 10 already. There have been some themes, and we've sent some questions to our panelists already and aim to get through as many of your questions as possible. As you're listening, if you have a question, please post it in the Q&A section. And if we don't get to your question today, please know that we will be sending further information via our newsletter following this event, and we'll be able to answer those questions at that time. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be making it available to you for viewing in the coming week, and it will be available via the TechDiversity website. In the lead up to today, we had a question from Morella, who would like some practical actions leaders can take to foster diversity within their technology organisation. Morella and to everybody else who's out there listening today, it's our goal that following this webinar, you can take one small action into your workplace that will contribute to making your colleagues feel included, heard, more at ease, and that they truly belong. One small action is all it takes. And to get to that outcome, I'd like to introduce you to our panel members. Madeleine Grummet, founder, CEO of Future Amp and girledworld, which won the TechDiversity Award in the education category last year. Hi, Madeleine. Robbie Robertson, managing partner, Virtual Office, Deloitte, and the national leader for Deloitte's LGBTI network. Deloitte won the TechDiversity People's Choice Award last year for their outstanding 50 LGBTI leaders. And Matt Ghani, Managing Director of Avanade Australia. Avanade have been a major sponsor and supporter of TechDiversity since it began 6 years ago. A big, big thank you to Avanade. The number of Avanade supporters with us today is a testament to your ongoing support, and it is greatly appreciated. We would not be here without you, so thank you. And the first question goes to you, Mac. It's a really shocking time. Leaders are getting caught up in the day-to-day priorities of COVID-19, keeping jobs, securing revenue. There's fear and there's uncertainty. Why is diversity so important during a time like this, Mac?
So I get the easy question. So I guess if I can just reflect as an individual, as a leader in a company, the first thing that sort of happened when we were starting to face these challenges was, you start to feel a bit of fear and dread, and sort of you start to think about all the things that could possibly go wrong with you, your family, the fact that you might be locked in your new office for the foreseeable future. Then you start to think about all the things that can happen to your organization and the people that are looking to you to lead them through a crisis, and everything from economic impacts, people impacts, and we've seen all of that sort of drawn out. So you can, you kind of start to go back to the things that are important, and the things that are important are those core values that you sort of have rested on your whole career, and your organization has. And so what we essentially have to do, and what organizations really have had to do, is just go back to what is one of the core fundamental things around keeping their people focused, and bringing them closer and humanizing this thing that's a bunch of folks sitting at home, isolated, socially distanced, would be feeling. And then you put a diversity and inclusion lens on top of that, and you kind of think, well, and you've seen there's many articles you can read where, they're talking about, you have two choices. You can just kind of put everything that has got to do with diversity and inclusion in your organizations as a nice to have, because you as a leader and as an organization have too many other important things to deal with, right? Like keeping people in jobs. Or what you can do is double down on those core values and those things that bring people together, and the causes and the purpose that you create in the organization. And I think what we were able to do was actually just double down on that. And so going back to one of the questions, so you raise is, what are the things that you can do, right? It's great to talk about it, but now you're in a pandemic, and people are, as I said, not as connected and don't feel as connected. If your organization is bought in and really invested in a diversity and inclusion as a core value, as a culture, doubling down on that really worked for us. We started over communicating. We had 3 calls a week. We had 2 calls which said, here's what's happening, here's the new rules, because the rules were changing, here's what you should do, really practical information. And then we had 1 call, which I was lucky enough to host, which was people talking about the things that they were doing with their clients, with their teams to deal with the situation in trying to do their day-to-day jobs. We let the grassroots of the organization come together in the ways that made sense for them to discuss things like diversity and inclusion, or the things that are important to them. So actually, we, instead of sort of panicking, I guess, about the things that are monetary, economic, etc. We just had to sort of go back to the core roots of the things that we believed in and focus our energy on that and bring our people together to kind of get focused on that, because that was the thing that's going to make the difference at the end there.
Terrific. And Robbie, how has Deloitte responded during this time?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Nice to see everyone. Hope you're having a lovely day. I echo a lot of what Mac was saying there in terms of the kind of steps that you've been seeing and the conversations you've been having. We're very similar. We actually doubled down on our purpose and our vision, and what we really started to ensure that we were elevating the conversation with our people around why we were here, what really matters, and what really matters for us is making sure that everyone has a voice. Everyone, we lean in to ensure that we don't leave anyone behind. If you're an extrovert, an introvert, if you are part of our First Nations community or our LGBT community, we look after each other, and we double down on a buddy system to make sure that people, particularly people who are living on their own, just made sure that somebody was checking in with them. We also looked at ensuring that every person, depending on where you sat in the organization, if you were just a recent graduate or you're a partner, we all were given 2 or 3 people that we became part of our ecosystem that we had to reach out and just make sure they were okay, and just genuinely ask, are you okay today? And is there anything we can do? And if we saw any signs at all that people were under mental or physical stress, or that they weren't being heard as we kind of work in this kind of working from home scenario or hybrid workplace, what can we do to support? And we put additional services around our EAP, so our employee protection and advisory services, so that people could call somebody, have a chat, and reach out. We also put together just some fun things like sharing some great stories around how people are creating new communities across different geographic borders. Teams who traditionally haven't had a chance to speak to each other because normally you're focused on the people who work and live in your home office. We've been able to break down those barriers and actually start to create communities across Australia, which has been really awesome. I was talking to a couple of my colleagues from the trans community. One's in Brisbane and one's in Darwin, and we were having a chat yesterday, and we would have never have connected if it wasn't for the fact that we have broken down those barriers and are able just to, and it's so normal for us to all jump on Zoom and say hello. So yeah, lots of things there.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you, Robbie. And Madeleine, where have you seen diversity work best? What learnings have you had?
I think one thing that might be helpful is to sort of define the way we think about diversity, because each organisation needs to first kind of set what is that definition that they have. And so to us, we define diversity as really, it's not just face value or skin or gender or sexual orientation. We're really talking about differences in skills, in attitudes, in beliefs, in personality traits. So we're looking at this neurodiversity that has become more the standard that we're looking for in terms of diversity. And when we think about that, then we talk about the human factor. And I think, Robbie, you make some great points that we have humanised work. We've had this chance with COVID. The silver lining is that, in fact, through being forced into our homes, we've had to show up in a way that we didn't before at work. And we've had this access point to what it really looks like to live and juggle inside a family if you have children, or living on your own, as you say, the isolation there that is going to really affect the way that person shows up to work and how they feel. And I think that's been an amazing amazing gift, if there's going to be one in this black swan economy and this terrible pandemic we're living through, is the gift is we've seen each other for the first time, and we've needed to do that, to embed that in the middle of an organisation for a long time. So where I've seen diversity work best is where people show up to work open. So we know Atlassian does some amazing work around this stuff, and I've been lucky enough to spend some time inside Atlassian, inside their shippets, and see what that lived diversity at a team level looks like. And I think they've got some fabulous practices for how people can work together, whether you are distributed and asynchronous, you're still coming together as a team. And I think these digital communities, Robbie, that you're talking about, again, this is not something that was standard practice for organisations prior to COVID, and that's been a great shift. And I really hope that over the curve we can start to retain some of those practices and behaviours inside our companies, and the way that we structure our teams that don't have to be reliant on a co-location factor. And the learnings, I mean, I've probably got a different viewpoint to you guys, or all of you in some respects, in that I spend a lot of time in the startup sector. So a lot of time in the innovation ecosystem, where these practices have been naturally occurring for a long time. So we use a lot of, cloud-based collaboration tools within our our teams. We've got people based all over the world. And so we've never been, the dependencies have never been about being inside a building together. And so I think that naturally startups can bank toward that way. And I think, part of that for us has been, to use the word earlier, Mac, about over-communication. And, you can communicate too much at times. You need to get work done. But how do we start to keep the conversation open so that we are truly sharing what we need to ensure that we have trust, understanding, and diversity embedded at the organisation from the top to the bottom?
Yeah. Some really great points there. And, the neurodiversity aspect, as Robbie mentioned earlier, this whole challenge around introversion and extroversion, all of that has changed now. We're communicating virtually, and we will continue to do so for quite some time for many of us. So getting back to that point and this whole concept of neurodiversity, Robbie, what suggestions do you have for leaders within organisations so that you can assist in that space?
Yeah, so I think that neurodiversity is it's an emerging conversation at Deloitte, which is fantastic that we've now been able to bring it to the surface and make it something that is a thing that we actually are doubling down on, and is just as important in our kind of training and our kind of mindset around recognizing that neurodiversity is something that we need to really lean into and solve for. Now, it's been a bit of a taboo subject, I think. Because we're, particularly at Deloitte, where there's so many A-type personalities who are very gung-ho, and it's all about how intelligent and how successful you can be. So anything that then actually diminishes from that kind of personality is quite frightening to a lot of people. So I think the first place we've started by actually just providing safe spaces for people to acknowledge that they are having challenges in the area, and that they're not alone. So we've started to build small communities where using technology to allow people to come from cross team, cross geography, cross office, to come together and actually talk about it. So that's the first thing, acknowledging, and then putting a support infrastructure in place for those individuals. The other thing that we started to do was we've identified a couple of partner champions, so leaders who've been struggling in this area themselves, but have found ways to overcome them. And we needed to hear their voice, because particularly for our younger members of the team who were too scared to come out and to have this conversation, to see that they were successful partners who were also had struggled and had found ways to overcome that, was really important. So that was the first three things that we're on the beginning of this journey. We're definitely not mature in it. So it was finding safe spaces, identifying that, creating small communities, and using digital technology to do so, and looking at leader champions to be able to start and make sure that people recognize that this affects everybody across the organization.
Can I just build on something you've said there, Robbie? I love those practices. What you're kind of tapping into is this idea of vulnerability, and we know there's been a lot of talk, Brené Brown and others have talked about this, and this is about redefining the leadership paradigm. And actually, in a time of crisis, we need to rethink what is the role of leaders in organisations. They need to also be very human. One of the practices we use, and I've seen it work very effectively in teams where there is trust, is starting a meeting with a check-in, where we say, ask everyone to just check in with, how am I feeling today? And if it's one word, at least it's a really great way to get a snapshot amongst the team. And it's just you acknowledge that person's in that moment and then move on to the business at hand. But it again puts that human very much at the forefront of that conversation.
Yeah, Madeleine, I
Yes.
can't agree with you more on that point. I think being totally open and transparent about, as leaders, how we are coping and being vulnerable, knowing that any minute now your 2-year-old, 3-year-old daughter could run in the room and disrupt a very important meeting, and not being shy about it. The fact that you've kind of not used to sitting at the same desk every day, day in, day out, and just telling your team it's okay to feel a little bit of angst about that. I think those are very important things. And then I think the idea is that when you do that, people feel comfortable that they can share as well. Because if the environment doesn't allow people to be vulnerable, then and the leaders are not, then it kind of makes it very difficult for other people to reach out as well.
Exactly. And the other thing, I suppose, Mac, is where you talk about, as a leader and your child runs in, and I'm the mother of 4 children learning from home, and it starts to normalize these practices.
Yes.
What does it look like for a leader to actually have a family and actually have some human collisions and crises that come into their day? And so that's been a really important shift in the way that we see and perceive leaders.
Yeah.
And we're getting to know each other so well. We are deepening these conversations that we're having. The virtual conversation is really opening up the world to better understand each other. And on that point, Robbie, you and I in the lead up today, we did talk about this, and I wonder what your perspective is beyond the current situation that we're in, this sort of new hybrid world that we might live in. How is it that we continue to have these deeper conversations?
Oh, it's a subject I'm having a conversation with about 6 or 7 times a day at the moment with different organizations as they're kind of grappling with the fact that there's no rule book anymore for what we're going through. There's no kind of shiny, client or organization who've been doing this ahead of everyone else to say that's what that looks like, therefore we can just follow what they're doing. And there's definitely organizations, and Madeleine, you mentioned Atlassian, they had already been embracing distributed workplace and hybrid workforce and a place as anyway in practices they've been doing. I know, recognize they were very much leading the way, and there were a couple of, and Telstra also really encouraged flexible working practices. We did as well at Deloitte. We actually created our virtual office hub a year ago because we recognized 25% of our team members, so it's 2,500 people, were taking advantage of our flexible working practices of working from home or working outside our offices. So in terms of what are we seeing going back in, I think, we've obviously been espousing the values or the great things that we've been learning from working virtually, but sometimes it's really good to get into a room and just be with people. That human connection, the emotional connection, sometimes it's just nice to be able to go, oh my God, nice to see you, and have a coffee with someone. And particularly if you are somebody who's just starting an organization and you're trying to establish your networks, establish your credibility, understand how you fit in, what is the culture of an organization, that happens more easily and more successfully in a physical space as opposed to in a virtual space. The virtual space is much more specific. Like you don't just bump into somebody in a virtual space to be able to introduce and spontaneously and have those conversations. So, we talk about the hybrid workplace, and I genuinely believe that is going to be the success in the future for all organizations. Organizations will embrace it in different ways. So some organizations may lean more to virtual working than in physical space, and others will lean more back into more physical space, working in a physical space and supported, augmented by virtual working. But I think that the ability to bring the both together will give every person, and depending on your personality type, depending on the area of work that you do, depending on the seniority of where you sit in the organization. One of the things I keep hearing from our younger team members is that there's the social aspects of being able to come into the office, meet their mates, have fun, go to the pub after work. they're genuinely missing that. So how do we ensure that we give that back to them? Because that is such an important part of their journey as professionals, to be able to do that. So for me, it's finding the balance.
Yeah, and as you said before, you know, we're all at the beginning of this, so we're all learning, and the more we can listen and be truly present and better understand where people are coming from, the more ideas we can develop together. We've just had a question come in from Emma. Can we address the number of women being let go in tech, as so many are the juniors in tech, for example, engineering teams? Could a clause in D&I policy help that says diversity will be a consideration when making decisions about layoffs? That might be a good question for you to start with, Mac.
I think it's a good point. I read an article this morning, which it was a US article, which said, as this pandemic continues and we see the economic impact, the most vulnerable are the ones that are effectively being laid off, and that is minority groups and women. We take a lens across every aspect of what we do, whether it's promotions, pay rises, etc., across our organization from a gender perspective, and so it's always top of mind for our people who are making decisions about the performance aspects, the promotion aspects, and so forth. It's a great thing to instill, to say, can we just kind of look at this and make sure we're not losing that core thing that we set out to do, which was to create a gender diverse organization, because we firmly believe that a gender diverse and a diverse organization as a whole was an organization that's going to be more creative and innovative. And one of the things that I sort of think about is, as I said before, if you make this a sideline issue, as a nice to have, you will lose the competitive advantage that you've built as an organization at the end of this, right? And so I totally agree. You have to, you can't just kind of, what the question is suggesting is right. If that becomes a side issue and you're not focusing on that aspect of it, then you will lose your competitive advantage, and you won't be there when this thing ends to be what you intended to be when we started, right?
Yeah. I think, Mac, some of the recent data from the Workplace Gender Equality Agency in Australia shows that women have been disproportionately affected by COVID with unemployment, apart from youth sector, because mainly women are in part-time or casual roles, or as the person's asked, in the question, they are being shelved off more quickly than their male counterparts. So I think we need to understand that. We need to sort of call out the elephant in the room and say that we've got a long way to go, baby, as Gloria Steinman said. We've got a long way to go in terms of really, with putting gender on the agenda again, where we look at some sectors where there is, certainly in tech, there's not enough representation. We know it's a very leaky STEM pipeline. And how do we start to address that at a policy level, at a structural level, and at an organisational level, so it's embedded and calcified within the actual context of the sector?
Madeleine, on that point, we've got a question from Ronan. Should diversity in itself be a goal, particularly in IT spheres? Should it not start with parity in education?
Absolutely. The companies I work in are education technology companies. We go right back into pipeline. It's a fantastic point. We need to start very, very early to change. What does an engineer look like? What does a leader look like? There's some of these social stereotypes that we all carry, and they're very, very powerful in terms of the way that we have biases and heuristics, all of us. And I think we need to start in education and show, young people that there is a variety of ways to show up in the world, that many, many types of different people can be leaders or perform different roles. And we do a lot of work. We've worked with about 30,000 students over the last 3 years to try and do exactly that and give them the skills they need to transition effectively into the future workforce in all of the ways that they are diverse.
The future is bright, that's for sure. There's another question here, Matt Wynne-Jones. I'm keen to get some ideas on how we can measure and track the business impacts and benefits of diversity. That would be a good question, again, going to you, Mac. What are you doing at Avanade? How do you track the business impacts and benefits?
I'd be honest with you. I'm too convinced to sit there and try to find 16 different ways of trying to figure out whether there's actually a dollar by dollar impact. I'll be totally frank with you, right? There's plenty of research that says creativity and innovation comes with diverse mindsets coming around the table to think about how our business is going to be competitive advantage, have a competitive advantage in the market, to think about how we can look after our people better. And having a diverse leadership means that we have people from all aspects of our workforce and of our clients and our community who can have a say in the things that we do, right? And I think, to me personally, I think just having a team that is, I think we have about 50% female in our leadership team, and we're trying to get a diverse workforce and get all these ideas. The innovation of the ideas that come out of that and the way that people feel connected is probably the most important aspect of all of this, right? When we do a survey and we ask our people, do they feel connected? Do they feel heard? Right? That effectively means if the results are saying yes, they are, and a large proportion of the organization is feeling that, then that means our people are happy. And if our people are happy, our clients are happy, right? If our clients are happy, our business is growing. And like, we can get really carried away with metrics, but I think, to me, that's probably the most effective way of looking at it. Right?
Mac, are they blind surveys?
Yes.
So we have actually starting to put some metrics on this at Deloitte. I think it's really important for us to be able to demonstrate that, particularly for again, the big RFPs that we're putting through to government, state and federal government, to be able to demonstrate that we are ensuring that we have very clear gender equity metrics, that we have very clear programs in place to ensure that we're removing bias in interview processes. So we actually remove when CVs come through, all names are removed, and anything that may provide any unconscious or conscious bias is removed. So people are being reviewed on merit of their experience and expertise, not on elements that might sway us. So we've removed all of that. So right from that beginning process, but then at the other end, in terms of being able to demonstrate that to clients when we're putting together proposals or presentations or pitch teams. So we have a very conscious kind of guide now around when we look at projects going, is there gender equity? Have we got gender diversity in here? Do we have ethnicity for anyone from our First Nations community represented in here? Have we got the right levels of experience and expertise all in here? So we have a checklist that we are very clear that we as partners have to go through and want to go through to ensure that every project, as much as we can, is demonstrating that complete diversity across the organization in every single project.
I do like the fact that there is a lot more focus from clients and government in terms of understanding what things we have in place to ensure that we do have a diverse workforce. I think, having those metrics, and as Robbie said, we kind of tracking and making sure we're doing the right things from a pay parity perspective. I think all that is fantastic, and that actually does drive us to think about it, keeps it in the forefront of what we do. So I think it's very good that is happening as an industry. And that we work in.
Yeah, I agree, Mac and Robbie, and I think one of the things I'd want to understand about the principles of that design is that are you involving diverse individuals in driving that change or designing that system? Because where we look at, for example, at a federal level, our politics at the moment, we know it's mainly white males who've designed the policies to address our COVID, workforce and issues we're facing. And, unless you're engaging the right stakeholders and bringing a really, truly diverse set of people to the table to think about how you redesign the system for them, then at the top, the model's going to be wrong. So it's great to hear that you are engaging in practices where you're really thinking about it from the very beginning of that process.
Yeah, and that includes the workplace gender equality agency reporting that we do, and sort of being a member of that and being accredited by that. I think those things are very important, right?
Love the answer to that question. So Matt, in response to that, maybe looking at the measures at the beginning of the whole process, rather than measuring as it unfolds, is a really great way to address this. Thank you. And we've got a question that's come in. This is from Peter. It's not enough to be gender diverse without taking an intersectional approach. What do the panelists think? Madeleine, how about we start with you on that one?
Absolutely. And I think I started by saying, how do we define diverse? And it's not just gender on the agenda. Diversity is about that neurodiversity, belief systems. There's a wide, intersectional spectrum. So I agree. It's not binary anymore. It used to be. And I think we're shifting now to recognise that that diversity of humanity has many different shades. So allow for that in the design.
And we've had a question from Shanila. A diverse group of people will have diverse needs, and it's important those are met. How do we meet the needs of each individual? I know that is a really big question. In the event, we've only got a few minutes left, but Mac, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, like you said, it is. We could have a whole webinar on that. Okay, but the first thing that comes in my mind is to listen. And that is probably where you have to start before you can even start to think about what to do, and to listen and to understand, and then put in play the things that you think you need to do to accommodate all those needs. I think that's, in that short time that we have, that would probably be step one for me, right?
Yes, step one. Anyone else want to add to that one?
So I agree with Matt. This is it's a massive question, and we can spend an hour on it. I think from breaking down the individuals, how we are approaching it is taking one step at a time, making sure that we are listening to as many different perspectives and point of views as we possibly can, considering those, bringing those into our decision-making processes, and making sure that every voice is heard. Now, that's a big ask, and it takes time. So we are systematically going through and making sure that we do get a chance to speak to all of our different communities within Deloitte, across the entire spectrum of intersectionality. There's so many. I'm making sure that we gather all of that data together, we gather those insights, create some themes, and start to think about what are the steps we can take forward that is going to support the bulk of our teams, and then hiving off the smaller asset requests who may be more specific around one or two subsets of our community or individuals, and actually then double down and go, we've heard you. We're on the journey. We will get to you. But we just want to acknowledge, similar to this question, we want to acknowledge that it needs to be responded to, and we will get to it. And this is when we'll get to it by so that we let them know that we haven't forgotten about them. So it's but we try and we're trying to break off the big rocks, get those resolved first, and then we've got thinking about the more individual requests and responses afterwards. Now we've got one. I mentioned before, we have a couple of our trans community who we're feeling that we didn't have the policy or process in place for their specific needs as they were transitioning through the process. So they wanted to understand, how do we help them? Now that's a very specific case. So we then brought in external support and guidance and expertise from the trans community to help us to think about the lived experience, standing in their shoes, and how can we use empathy to understand, to make sure that their journey is as we as an organization can support them as they go through both the physical and emotional journey that they are going through. And we don't have the lived experience, but we're gathering on the data of people that do, and we're listening, and we're changing our policies to suit as it goes along. Now, one of the things that we've done for them is we recognize that day one, as when they come back into the office after they've transitioned, is a really difficult moment. So what we've done is actually given them $1,500 for them to go over the weekend of the transition to go and buy themselves a really new outfit, so that they are spending on anything they want, so that when they walk back into the office, they're walking back with confidence, with pride, with a sense of with a kind of excitement that we are celebrating and supporting them in their decisions. And that small thing of being able to provide them with that money to go out there and buy their a new outfit for that was just one small thing.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you so much for that response. We're getting very close, unfortunately, to having to wrap up. I just would love one final point from each of you, starting with Madeleine.
Well, I think we've opened Pandora's box on so many levels today. I think what Robbie just said, I mean, what we're talking about is humans, and that we need to sit in the shoes and the story of the people that are inside our organisations. So we see them for who they are, truly, and it's one of the principles of design thinking. Just start at the centre and really acknowledge and validate the humans who are in the room, and great teamwork starts there.
Yeah, thank you, Madeleine. Mac?
I agree. I think we are in this situation where we're going back to being more human and focusing on the things that make us human, things that are important, and the values that we are that surround us. And I think we need to be aware of other people's things, that the values and things that are important to them, and listen and acknowledge and act as you can. I think it's the best thing we can do.
Yeah, thank you. And Robbie?
Madeleine talked about the vulnerability of leaders at the beginning of the webinar. I just think that's the best thing I've seen coming through out of COVID. I really do. I've seen leaders who've said, I actually don't know what the answer is, and I don't need to be, I don't need to have an answer. I just need to bring the whole team on the journey, and we'll figure it out together. So that vulnerability of leaders and the acceptance that we don't know everything I think is awesome. I hope leaders continue to be that human and vulnerable.
Yeah, and take off their suits and put down their shields.
Take those suits. Absolutely.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very, very much so. And I love the idea of just, starting each meeting with, how are you feeling? Something as simple and as small as that is my takeaway from today. Thank you so much to our speakers, Madeleine, Matt, and Robbie.
Thank you.
So many really great takeaways. Everyone, you will receive a post-event survey. Please complete it. Your feedback is so important to us, because we will be able to tailor these webinars around what it is you would like to hear. And this is such a big and important conversation. Watch out for the details for our Hall of Fame, launching very soon. And our next webinar is coming up on the 2nd of September, same time, same place. And right now it's 10:43. You've got 15 minutes until getting ready for your next Zoom call. Please just take a few minutes out of your day and think about that one small action that you could take to keep diversity front of mind in decision making in your business. What could potentially be the impact? Please share your learnings from today with your colleagues and members of your team. There's never been a more important time for diversity in all of its forms. With diversity, we feel we belong, we make better decisions, and we create happy workplaces for everyone. Thank you.